Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first let's talk about the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, and we will start with talks that took place in the territory of the city of Manila yesterday between Marco Rubio and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Lavrov. In the case of Ukraine, perhaps there is an opportunity to bring it to an end if we can play a constructive role. But there are other areas that the US and Russia can cooperate on. We are the two largest nuclear-armed countries on the planet. We have to have a relationship with the Russian government, even though we have areas of disagreement. So this is the statement of Rubio, and later we received statements from the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia. Americans are directly involved in targeting Ukrainian weapons in Russia, including civilian facilities. What else did the foreign minister say following his participation in Asian events? Russia assumes that its American colleagues that have not yet abandoned the Anchorage proposals. A meeting with Rubio has been agreed upon and will take place on the morning of the 23rd of July. The meeting with Rubio will be useful in any case. And before I started making this video, we received the first statements and first reports from the Russian side about these talks with Rubio. At his meeting with Rubio-Lavrov reaffirmed Russia's readiness to resolve the conflict in Ukraine and its commitment to the Anchorage agreements, according to the Russian Foreign Ministry. Furthermore, at the meeting discussed the normalization of working conditions for the Russian and US diplomatic missions, agreed to continue diplomatic contacts, and many other different things. But the most important thing, that the meeting between Rubio and Lavrov lasted just 35 minutes, which means that talks have failed without any chances to normalize relations between Russia and the United States of America. There are probably two different possible developments of the situation. Either talks have failed completely and the United States of America rejected any proposal from the side of the Russian Federation, or the United States of America took a small pause to discuss the Russian proposal, probably with the President of the United States of America. The thing is that the Russians, once again, they concerned that the United States of America provide the Ukrainians coordinates to attack deep inside of the territory of Russia. And this is a very big problem. For example, during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians once again attacked deep inside of the territory of Russia using hundreds of drones. And as for the overnight attack, the Ukrainians were attacking the city of Voronezh, and the sources reported that the Ukrainians were trying to destroy another warehouse in this area, but the Russians managed to repel this attack. Furthermore, drones of the armed forces of Ukraine moved further in the eastern direction, and several hours later we start receiving reports from the area of the city by the name of Novospassk. And here, according to information we have, the Ukrainians attacked this oil depot, this oil base, and as a result of attack, this oil base was destroyed, and this is the video that we received this morning. Another oil tank, another fuel tank was damaged by the Ukrainians, but as you can see from the other side, we see that the Russians established protection nets on these facilities with the purpose to protect them, but we see that this kind of protection didn't help the Russians to save this oil tank. Furthermore, the drones of the armed forces of Ukraine continued moving further in the eastern direction, and several hours later we received a report that explosions were heard and took place in the area of the settlement by the name of Subhakulova. As for this territory, we also have an oil base that was attacked by the armed forces of Ukraine and probably was damaged, either damaged or destroyed completely. And these are the videos that we received from this area. So, which means that the Russians are saying that the United States of America is involved in these attacks because the United States of America most likely provides coordinates, and the most important, they provide positions of the Russian air defense forces, which allows the Ukrainians to maneuver between air defense positions and to attack targets they want. And these talks took place today, this morning, on the 23rd of July of 2026, not because the Russians were asking the United States of America not to provide the Ukrainians with coordinates and so on. The thing is that according to different sources, according to different updates, the United States States of America is planning to is planning to increase or to develop their military operation in the Middle East. And several sources stated that there are very high chances that there are going to be a ground operation in this area. But as for the ground operation, it seems that the United States of America is planning to maybe to land somewhere in the area of the Strait of Hormuz. But as for this operation, several sources reported that this operation could take place on the border between the state of Kuwait and Iraq and the southwestern or the western parts of Iran. So we're talking about this territory around the settlement to the south of the settlement of Ahwaz, involving and including the cities like Bandar Eman Khmeinin and Bandar El Mashar. So the cities with port infrastructure and so on. So everything is possible in this area. And telling the truth, these days we start receiving lots of updates from this area of how the coalition were bombing military positions of the Iranians. And we have lots of updates that the Iranians during the previous days managed to deal significant damage to the US bases through the Middle East. And according to information we have and according to different journalists and media, the Russians are behind these attacks. They provide the Iranians with coordinates. So it seems that the Russians were trying to reach a deal when neither the Russians nor the Americans will provide coordinates and targets to both Ukrainians and the Iranians. But it seems that once again the deal either was rejected or the United States of America took a small pause for consultations. So anyway, let's wait and see what is going to happen next. But if you ask my opinion, I believe that the deal was rejected completely by the US side. Now let's talk about the conflict on the territory of Ukraine. And first, let's talk about the battle through the Black Sea. According to information we have, the Western companies stopped using the Black Sea, or at least they stopped using the port of Odessa and the infrastructure of the southwestern parts of Ukraine for commercial purposes. The world's largest shipping company, Maersk, has suspended operations in Ukraine due to the escalation of Russian attacks on Ukrainian ports. Vessels are being rerouted to the Romanian port of Constanta, so which means that the logistics have been increased for the Ukrainian side. Now the vessels are going in the city of Constanta to the port infrastructure, and from Ukraine and in Ukraine now exports everything they have through the same port, which means that it increases losses and expenses. So we see that the Russians since the beginning of July have carried out lots of attacks through the city of Odessa and the Odessa region. Lots of vessels, lots of different ships, lots of tankers were damaged and destroyed by Russians as a result of attacks. And every single day since this moment we've been receiving tens of or dozens of videos about this. And as a result of this attack, we see that the Russians managed to force Ukraine to stop export and to stop everything that connected to the situation. And for example, during the previous 12 hours, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation once again reported about more strikes on infrastructure and the different vessels and ships through this area. And this is a very bad situation for the armed forces of Ukraine, and obviously it's time for a deal. It's time either for a deal or for something else, and most likely one of the topics between Marco Rubio and Sergei Lavrov was the normalization of the situation in the area of the Black Sea, both for Ukrainians and for Russians. Anyway, let's wait and see how the things are going to develop with this, but it seems that and everything is not so simple. Everything is not so simple, but we will understand this within the next several weeks or days. Another important thing is that the second day in a row, the Russians use more than a normal number of drones to attack the territory of Ukraine. As for the previous 24 hours, the Russians used 174 air means to attack the territory of Ukraine, including drones and missiles. Yesterday, if you remember, the Russians used 220 drones, so these are very big numbers. And for example, 3 days ago, between the 20th and the 21st of July, the Russians used just 58. And during the previous days, the Russians were using between 90 and 110 drones to attack the territory of Ukraine, and now we see that the Russians increased the number of drones involved into daily attacks, which means that the Russians most likely are preparing themselves before the beginning of another massive attack through the entire territory of Ukraine, and this massive attack may take place anytime soon. And due to strikes that were carried out by the Ukrainians deep inside of the territory of Russia, it seems that the strikes will take place much earlier than expected. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground, and first let's talk about the Zaporizhzhia direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation. First of all, the Russians continue attacking warehouses, gas stations, ammo depots of the armed forces of Ukraine in the area of the city of Zaporizhzhia. In this video we can see another gas station destroyed by Russians, and this is the gas station that the Russians attacked during the night. Furthermore, we received videos confirming the damage that the Russians managed to deal to this territory as well. So the Russians continue attacking logistics, warehouses, ammo depots of the armed forces of Ukraine through the city of Zaporizhzhia with the purpose to reduce their military capabilities through the battle of the city of Orekhov and through the entire Zaporizhzhia direction. Furthermore, we received a video where we can see how Russians were attacking the settlement of Orekhov with aviation. As a result of attack, another temporary deployment point of the armed forces of Ukraine was destroyed. As for changes on the ground, today we received the small changes through the city of Stepnogorsk, and these are the changes between the dates. And I would like to remind you that right now the Russians are counter-attacking, trying to restore control over the territory the Russians lost between February and May of 2026. And once again, it is already a third or a fourth battle for the city of Stepnogorsk, and once again the Russians are advancing, trying to take everything under complete control and to force the Ukrainians to fall back from this area. Now let's talk about the northern Zaporizhzhia direction. It seems that this is another area where the Russians began their counter-offensive operation as well as an offensive operation. Yesterday, if you remember, the Russians improved their positions through the settlement of Blagodatne, and today we received the report that Russians improved their positions through these pockets to the south of the river of Volcha. This is a very important situation. The Ukrainians managed to take these territories under complete control during the March, February, April counter-offensive operation. Now the Russians are trying to take everything back and to force the Ukrainians to fall back to the north of the river of Volcha. As for the morning of the 23rd of July of 2026, it was reported that the Russians recaptured the village of Novogrigorovka, the village of Novogeorgievka, and the Russians improved their positions to the north of Zaporizhzhia. Most likely the Russians will continue until the Ukrainians leave this territory completely. Now let's talk about the Pavlograd or Dnipropetrovsk direction. During the previous 12 hours, additional changes were also recorded between the settlements of Muravka and Novopodgorodnya. These are the changes on the ground. According to pro-Russian sources, the Russians improved their positions, and the Russians continue advancing further in the western direction with the purpose to outflank the settlement of Novopavlovka and attack the Ukrainians from behind. So this is a very important offensive operation. The Russians are trying to maintain the lines and to begin probably a bigger offensive operation towards the river of Dnipro itself. As for the city of Dobropolye, if you remember, yesterday we received the report that Russians improved their position significantly through the eastern parts of the city. As for the previous 24 hours, lots of pro-Ukrainian sources began making reports and began reporting about the situation in the area of the city of Dobropolye, confirming that the Russians right now are trying to concentrate a critical mass and that the Russians most likely in coming days, weeks, would try to take under complete control the city of Dobropolye by breaking through Ukraine's defenses through the eastern parts of the city. So pro-Russian sources began reporting that the Russians have already taken under complete control the eastern part of Dobropolye. As for pro-Ukrainian sources, they just began reporting that the Russians are going to do this, which means that we see some delay between reports published by Russians and the Ukrainian side, but from the other side we see that most likely both the pro-Russian and pro-Ukrainian sources confirm this situation. Now let's talk about the Kramatorsk direction. During the previous 12 hours, we received the report that Ukrainians began evacuation of the settlement by the name of Belinka. So this is a very important situation. If you remember, during the previous days, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly through the territory to the east of the settlement of Belinka. And furthermore, we had reports during the previous days that the Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups were recorded through the settlements of Pershamarovka and Vasilievska Pustosh. And according to these updates, now the Russians are operating somewhere along this red line, which means that the Russians and first sabotage and reconnaissance groups are just several meters probably from the settlement of Belinka. So just 100 kilometers before the settlement, which means that it's time for Ukrainian side to begin a mandatory and total evacuation of this area with the purpose to prepare the armed forces of Ukraine before the beginning of the battle for this area. As for the Liman direction, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special, just several videos published by Russians how they were bombing temporary deployment points of the armed forces of Ukraine, the territory the Ukrainians use for river crossings. We are waiting for additional updates from this area, but yet nothing, as you can see. But we need to understand that currently there are very heavy clashes for these territories. The Ukrainians are trying to probably unblock the Slaviansk-Druzhkovka agglomeration from the north, and the Russians are trying to finish the encirclement of the armed forces of Ukraine through this area. As for the northern directions, during the previous 12 hours, additional changes on the ground were recorded in the area of the settlement of Bely Kolodys, and these are the changes on the ground. The group of forces north confirmed that Russians entered the settlement of Yurchenkova and that there are very heavy clashes in this area. And for the first time since the beginning of the battle for the city of Kolodys, the Russians also reported that first groups of Russian army managed to approach the settlement of Ivanovka. So this is a very important situation. We see that the geography of the Russian offensive in this area is increasing. The Russians are fighting with the Ukrainians through many villages through the northeastern parts of the Kharkiv region, and it seems, and as we discussed during the previous days, a breakthrough is brewing. As for the city of Kharkiv itself, during the previous 12 hours, more gas stations were destroyed. One of the gas stations was destroyed along the Derevyanka street, and we have, for example, this video where we can see the consequences of attack. The Russians destroyed a fuel let's say, box, and as a result of attack, a truck and this fuel station was damaged. So the Russians continued destroying gas stations through the entire territory of the northeastern parts of Ukraine. Another gas station was also destroyed on the territory of the city of Sumy, and we have this video where we can see the consequences of the overnight attack. This gas station was destroyed between the 22nd and the 23rd of July of 2026. And as for the city of Sumy, since the beginning of the fuel war, the Russians have already destroyed several dozens of gas stations. And at the same time, and meanwhile, the Russians continue preparation and preparing themselves before the beginning of another massive attack, and this massive attack can start anytime soon. And that's it for the short video. The Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.